Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for our discussion today. We're going to be talking about Time Magazine. And I get Time Magazine to the house and I read Time Magazine, but I have to say that Time Magazine is on the decline. It's been on the decline for at least a decade or so. Because, why do I say it's on the decline? Because every single article, every single piece that's promoted here in Time Magazine comes from a radical left-wing Democrat talking point perspective. That's the honest truth. There is no debate. There is no discussion in Time Magazine. There is no controversy about these issues. There is no conversation where you bring in the best voices from one side and then the best voices on the other side and they have a rational dialogue. No, it is one-sided 100%. Time Magazine used to be a great magazine. It used to be a go-to magazine where people would go to find some of the best writing in the world, because they would cover the issues of the day. But now it is a propaganda tool. It's a propaganda arm for the radical left. There's no other way to describe Time Magazine. So if you are an older person and you remember Time Magazine and you remember, wow, that used to be a very good magazine, I would subscribe to that and I would read the articles and it would keep me informed as to what is going on in the world. Well, it doesn't do that anymore. What it does is feeds you left-wing propaganda all the time, every issue. And all the assumptions in Time Magazine are radical, secular, humanist, almost atheist, radical, left-wing, socialist-leaning from that perspective. And it's probably to the point right now that it's a Bernie Sanders socialist type of perspective you'll usually get. It is more radical than even, say, like a Barack Obama was in 2012. It's more radical than, say, definitely it's more radical than Barack Obama in 2008. It is getting worse and worse and worse every issue, every year. And so I've been subscribing to Time Magazine for years, and every single year it gets worse and worse and worse. It's one-sided and it's narrow, and then it attacks everyone else that differs from it in its perspective on the radical left. I'll give you an example. This issue is the June issue 2022, and they have an article right in the middle of the magazine. It's about trans teenagers. That's right, trans teenagers. And it says, "We aren't going anywhere." And it shows a picture of a young person, boy or girl, I'm not sure. And that's the whole point with these trans activists. They don't want you to know who they are. They don't want you to know what they are or what they identify with. But here is an article, and let me just read a little bit of what it says, and then I'll comment on it, because I'll show you how far this magazine, this Time Magazine, has gotten. Now, it used to be the case where homeschoolers, that is, kids that were being taught by their parents, usually Christian parents, trying to keep their kids out of the public school, trying to keep them from being indoctrinated, would read through Time Magazine and discuss the issues. Now, it's almost pointless to do that because the articles are so propaganda heavy of the left-wing Democratic talking points that it's not even worth going over it with your children unless you're on some kind of a debate team, unless you're trying to teach them logical fallacies, unless you're trying to dissect arguments. But for the average homeschooling kid, you're not going to want to bring your kid through this magazine because it is a brainwash, mind control propaganda tool for the Democratic Party. Now, let me read an article in a recent issue. It's from the article, "We Aren't Going Back." It's talking about trans kids. It says, "Freedom," That's that kid's name right there. Freedom, a fake name, I'm sure. A two-spirit 13-year-old. What? Poses for a portrait in Washington or Watertown, South Dakota. At last year's Pride Parade, he dressed up as Freddie Mercury. This year, he wants to dress as a rainbow king. The past year hasn't been easy, and he's had to deal with bullies. Oh, I bet. But he's also had classmates come out to him, and he says he likes that people know I'm someone they can trust. So here's a 13-year-old confused kid who has renamed himself Freedom, and he claims that he's a two-spirit 13-year-old, whatever the heck that means. Again, you have this language that is being used today by teenagers. They don't know what the definitions are. They like the way it feels. And so you have adults in the magazine world promoting this foolishness. It says in the Bible that foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the rod of correction will drive it out. Well, you need adults in the room who will look at these pathetic teenagers and say, look, you're just confused. You don't know what you're doing. You haven't been around very long. You're only 13. So why don't you just listen to your parents, listen to the adults in the room, and don't think you know more than they do. Here is a 13-year-old confused teenager, renames himself or herself, I think it's a girl trying to be a boy, Freedom, and says that he's a spirit, a two-spirit. Where did he get that idea? He got that from the LGBTQ community, who are now pushing their perversion on the youth of our country, and the magazines like Time Magazine, the mainstream media, NBC, CBS, CNN, they're all behind pushing that agenda. So it says, the pain and the pride of a generation changing how America sees gender. A generation changing how America sees gender? You mean the teenagers are running the show? They're pushing the agenda? So the next page in the article, they have two teenagers sitting at a roller rink. And let's see. It says, for transgender expansive American adolescents, the past year school has been a paradox. What? Gender expansive American adolescents. What? So this language again appears all of a sudden. There were words being invented on the fly by journalists. They come in to describe something, and all of a sudden they start coining phrases and acting like these phrases have always been there, and looking at you like, well, you don't know what gender expansive American adolescent is? You don't know what that means? As if we should know what their fabricated, man-made fake language is, and we should speak their fake language, as if it's assumed that everyone knows what that means. No, it's a gibberish. Gender expansive American adolescents. So they're expanding the gender spectrum. And we're supposed to just say, oh, okay, yeah, they're expanding the gender spectrum, like that's normal. It's not. It is sick. It is perverse. It is prideful. It is vain. It is arrogant. It says, never before have diverse gender identities and expressions been celebrated so openly and inclusively, with Generation Z leading new conversations that challenge traditional conceptions of the male gender binary. Diverse gender identities and expressions celebrated. So I will agree with them there that never before have we been assaulted by such foolishness on a large scale as we are right now. Children and teenagers and young people are more confused today about who they are than has ever been in the world's history. And that's because the adult generation are letting them talk foolishly, act foolishly, think foolishly, And in fact, many cases, celebrating their foolishness and promoting their foolishness and defending it, instead of saying, now, you need to learn about the world. There are two categories. There's male and female. God made them male and female. The book of Genesis, chapters 1, 2, 3. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then it goes on and talks about, and he made them male, and then he made them female. First Adam, and then Eve. There are two sexes, two genders, male, female, man, woman, and then the parents clarify these things for the teenagers. Well, they're not doing that anymore. They're feeling like they have to let the teenagers go in their folly. Again, the Bible talks about in Proverbs, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. And we need to correct these children. We need to discipline these children. We need to clarify things for them. That's what parents are supposed to do to help initiate the child into an adult world. You train them in the way that they should go. You don't just leave them to their own devices, or you don't leave them to their peer group, which is happening more and more today. Adults are just simply saying, oh, well, that's the new generation. No, it's not the new generation. It's supposed to be you and the child learning and instructing and not letting the generation raise them. It says young people are embracing a wide range of gender identities and coming out as transgender, non-binary, or pan-indigenous umbrella term two-spirit, among other identities at earlier stages. Again, I have to agree that that is the truth, but it's a sad truth. It's not something to be celebrated. It's not something to be encouraged. It's not something to be happy about. It's something to be grieving about, that so many teenagers in our culture now, the modern world, are confused about something so basic. It's so simple. Knowing what gender you are, knowing what sex you are. It's so easy. It's so simple. It's basic. It's like 2 + 2 is 4. And yet now we have a whole generation that are not being guided, not being directed, not being taught by adults. And so they're coming up with all of this foolishness, and the adults seem to want to promote them and empower them to be fools. And that's just what it is. It says there's been an explosion of language in how young people express their gender. That is true. Again, I agree with this assessment, but it's not a happy assessment. It's not a positive development. It's not a constructive thing in society. It's a negative thing. And so you have publications like Time Magazine, they're celebrating this. They're applauding this. They're encouraging this. They're showcasing this. They want this to continue. They like this trend. This is an anti-God, anti-Christian, anti-Bible, anti-morality trend. And it's pro-foolishness, pro-folly trend. And so as adults, as Christians, as adults, we need to object to it and say, no, I don't celebrate that. I will not celebrate Pride Month. Pride Month is Disgrace Month from a Christian perspective. The Williams Institute at UCLA, which researches sexual orientation and gender identity law and policy, estimates that 150,000 Americans ages 13 through 17 are trans. A national survey released in May by the Trevor Project found that 67% of LGBTQ youth surveyed did not identify as cisgender. Visibility and representation has never been higher, and acceptance and understanding of gender diversity continue to climb. Again, I totally agree with that assessment. There is a wave of folly and foolishness that is sweeping the young people in this nation, and it's sweeping the older generations in this nation as well, because they're seeing this happen before their eyes, and they're doing nothing in opposition to it. They're not trying to correct. They're not trying to teach. They're not trying to instruct. They're simply letting it happen, or at worst, like Time Magazine, they're promoting it. They're encouraging it. And what you encourage, what you promote, you get more of. That's the same way with the transgender phenomenon. Years and years ago, transgenderism was like a microscopic percentage of people who even had any desire to do something like so-called transition from one's gender, sex to the other. And now it's almost like an epidemic, a social contagion that is taking place among especially young girls and junior high and high school girls. They're coming out as transgender all the time, and it's growing, and it's not based on reality. It's based on a social contagion and mass hysteria. But yes, visibility and representation have been higher. Unfortunately, yes. But at the same time, these young people have experienced escalating attacks from state houses around the country. Attacks? How about they're experiencing pushback? They're experiencing common sense, moral objections, and they're calling that an attack. See, the left always calls an attack a criticism. If you criticize them, if you question what they're doing, if you question, for example, that teenage girls should have their breasts removed simply because they feel like they want to transition, so-called, or feel that they want to question their gender, and the medical professions are now eager to have their breasts removed. If you question that, then you're attacking them. That's a lie. Questioning, asking for explanation, holding people accountable, asking people to explain themselves and give rational explanations why something is good when it looks like it's a bad thing, that's not an attack. That's what adults do. They hold each other accountable. Iron sharpens iron. Criticism is not bad. It's not an attack. It just means they want you to defend what you're promoting. Conservative lawmakers have turned the full force of America's fury culture wars on trans and gender expansive youth, unleashing a torrent of anti-trans state-level legislation that limits whether they can play sports. Okay, this whole sentence is pure propaganda, mind control, garbage. When you have common sense, moral legislation in respect to boys and girls in schools, when you say common sense policies like men cannot swim in women's swimming events, those are not anti-trans, they're not bigoted, they're the common sense, they're the wisdom, they're the adults in the room. And the trans activists who are acting foolish need to be held accountable, and we need to say to them, no, you cannot come in to a high school or junior high and transform it into your foolishness. And you can call that an attack, and you can call that anti-trans. You can say whatever you want, but we're simply doing the responsible adult thing and saying no to this foolishness. So if you're a fool and you call wisdom an attack, who's the fool? You. So the so-called anti-trans state-level legislation limits whether they can play sports. Yeah, men shouldn't be in women's sports. Use a bathroom aligned with their gender identity. Yeah, men should not be able to go into a girl's restroom. Study LGBTQ issues in school. No, it's not studying LGBTQ issues. It's promoted by the curriculum and putting a positive spin on these sexual perverted lifestyles. That's the objection that parents have. So every single description in this sentence is totally propaganda. Or access medical care to affirm their gender. What that means, medical care to affirm their agenda, what that means is girls chopping off their breasts. Young girls, 12, 13, are permitted and encouraged to chop off their breasts. That is not medical care affirming, gender affirming care. That is gobbledygook. That is propaganda language that's used by the trans activists to try to get us and gaslight us and make us feel bad about being the adults in the room and objecting to this. So again, Time Magazine, this article by Madeline Carlisle is a pure 100% LGBTQ propaganda party line. That's what it is. Pure 100%. It's not reporting. It is advocating. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, a Republican, signed several such policies into law in April. She said she believes very strongly that if the good Lord made you a boy, you are a boy, and if he made you a girl, you are a girl. Now, that's the adult in the room speaking. Kay Ivey is the adult in the room. And she's speaking basic, common, moral sense. If you are born a boy, you are a boy. And you can't change that. Your DNA is male. If you're born a girl, you are a girl. You can't select your sex. You can't select your gender. Your biology has already determined what you are. That's basic adult in the room wisdom. It's not profound. It's not rocket scientist level intellectual discussion. It's just basic. And yet, that common sense moral reasoning is laughed at. It's mocked in this article. LGBTQ advocates argue such laws seek to legislate trans and gender expansive people out of existence. Here we go. Here's another propaganda phrase. They always claim that people are trying to define them out of existence. No, nobody denies they exist. Nobody denies that there are confused teenagers that claim that they're the opposite gender. Nobody denies that there are confused teenagers. We just don't want to celebrate their confusion and promote their confusion and spread their confusion and encourage their confusion, because if you do, you get more of it, and then we'll have all kinds of problems as the critical mass of foolishness, folly, and confusion spreads across our country among our young people. We'll have to deal with all the problems that causes, and we don't want that. And so we oppose their proposal, which is basically saying we should allow little boys to decide that they can be little girls, or little girls decide they can be little boys, and leave it into the hands of children, which is total folly. NBC News calculates roughly 240 anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced. That is 240 common sense moral policies that adults with brains have come up with and make a lot of sense. And they call that anti-LGBTQ. No, it's wisdom when it meets foolishness. The wisdom of the conservative Christian meeting the foolishness of the LGBTQ activist movement. Childhoods, which can be difficult to navigate in the best of circumstances, true, have been disrupted for the kids being vilified and pathologized by lawmakers. No, they're not being vilified and pathologized. They're being told to stop fantasizing and stop acting like little fools. Because that's what adults in the room are supposed to do to children who are acting stupid. You're supposed to tell them, stop acting that way. And there are adults that should be telling these teenagers, stop talking and thinking the way you are because you're acting foolish. You are a boy if you were born a boy. You're a girl if you were born a girl. You can't switch. It's not up to you. And it wasn't assigned, your sex was not assigned at birth by the doctor. You were classified in a certain sex based on your biology. So don't let them say that gender assigned at birth as if it's an arbitrary decision. No, it's determined by biology. Advocates say they've seen a spike in bullying in schools. Oh, that's always the rationale. We have to give these kids freedom to be whatever they want to be, whatever foolishness comes out of their mouth, whatever ideas, foolishness are bouncing around their heads. We have to let them go, or else they will feel like they're being bullied by people who resist that. Or here's the next thing. We'll drive them to suicide, because we all know that if there's ever a teenager that is even thinking about suicide or threatening suicide, it's because of those mean conservative Christians who want to impose reality on them. Well, we need to continue to teach children and teenagers reality, whether they threaten to kill themselves or not. And don't let that be a psychological manipulation move either, because it is. Families in Texas, Alabama, and elsewhere are contemplating moving to states less hostile to their children's rights. Children's rights. Children have a right to switch genders. Is that what we're saying now? This article is pure foolishness, and it's buying into the folly. And with the midterm elections approaching, the political fervor is likely to intensify as conservative politicians continue to leverage their attacks to rally their base. It isn't leveraging an attack to rally the base. It's simply resisting this Democrat-led, liberal, radical agenda that tries to redefine male and female and boys and girls. And we're opposing that. Yeah. And we use politics to oppose it. Why not? They're using politics to promote it. They're using candidates to promote this foolishness. Why can't we use politics to oppose the foolishness? You know, it's just a double standard here. You know, why wouldn't we vote for candidates that don't want to follow this? The photographer Anne Flanagan spent a year documenting gender expansive young people, there that phrase again, newly invented, across the U.S. as they experience adolescence at fraught political and cultural time. Flanagan's subjects are supporting one another, thriving, and finding joy. That's not what statistics say. If you have a whole community of people who are contemplating suicide every other thought, that's not joy. They're getting ready for summer vacation. They're hanging out with their friends. They're maneuvering the social dynamics of prom. What a joke. They're walking across the stage at high school graduation, getting their diplomas. Yes, and they're confused as ever, looking to the future, planning for better days, planning foolishness. These movements send their own message. Zuri, 19, this confused boy, says, "We aren't going anywhere." Well, they may not be going anywhere, but it's still the adults in the room that are responsible for helping them, guide them in where they're supposed to go. Well, pray about this issue. Pray that sanity comes back to our culture. Pray that we don't fall into even more moral depravity than we are falling into right now. I'm afraid society has gone so far that we are almost past the point of no return, but we need to continue to pray and ask God to save our nation, save our culture, and we as Christians can play a part in that if that's the Lord's will. See you back next week. God bless.